Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Much better. You have other people's notes here. I was specifically told not to make any comments. No good edge jokes. Nothing about YouTube. All right. Hello.
Hello.
Let's talk about edges, shall we? Shall we? Shall we? Yes. I love the idea of a radical center, and that when there's centers, there are edges, and there's this constant relationship, this push and pull between being and not being, and this and that, and here and there, and a center and an edge. And so let's figure out what we can learn from edges, and what edges teach, essentially. So let's observe them in reality where they show up. Can I change the slides myself? Hi, I'm Pressman.
Hi.
Hi, and I am, like most of us here, I imagine, I am an inhabitant, an edge dweller myself. I inhabit a lot of different universes, and I'm a principal at Intangible, which is a local organization dedicated to the intangible framework, which is a way of bringing the arts and humanities, design thinking, and mind wandering to organizations and individuals to creatively solve problems. And I use that as an impetus, basically. That's my ambition, is to use those things to achieve those goals. And I do that in a variety of galaxies. And I kind of sail in and out of the edge of all these galaxies, which is not a way I recommend anyone living, but this is how I'm doing it. And I work at the Wayfinding Academy. Have you ever heard of the Wayfinding Academy? Yes, I'm a program director there. That's a small, nonprofit, alternative college. And I'm running a program there teaching adults how to use creativity and vitality in the arts and humanities to figure out what's next in their lives. And I'm a fellow of Arizona State University Center for Science and Imagination. That's a good time. I'm working at University of Portland in the School of Nursing. Thank you. You won't escort her out. And at the School of Nursing, I'm working with nurses to figure out ways to combat compassion fatigue, which is not just for nurses, obviously, but I imagine that resonates a lot in this room. And finding ways to build systems that introduce less compassion fatigue and build readiness in individuals so that compassion fatigue doesn't happen. It's kind of preventative compassion fatigue care. So I'm doing that there. I also teach cooking at NUNM because nothing's better for compassion and fatigue than grilling things. So I teach cooking there. I also publish short stories, science fiction short stories, poetry, and have an art practice. And so all of these are kind of part of the life of living on multiple edges. And the more I talk about it, the more exhausted I get. So let's talk about edges. And my whole sort of experience with edges began as an anthropology student. Does anyone here study anthropology? Raise your hands high, be proud. Your mother's probably asked you what you would do with your degree. So my mother asked me, and this is what I do with my degree. I have this slide. But this this is a $40,000 slide. I paid it off, we're good. But it's worth it because that's a gorgeous slide, is it not? Is it not? Yeah. But it's also a slide showing edges. There's a couple of edges here. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, it's a tool. It's a stone tool. It's a 3-million-year-old stone tool. These are the first stone tools that non-human hominids made. And so they were actually making them by knocking edges into stone. Hey. I know you were up here with me. Okay, all right, that's good. We work together. So, yes, they were putting edges in stones, but it was also an edge in the evolution of our entire genus. When these started to be made, these creatures could live in any environment they wanted to. They no longer lived in environments. They no longer had that edge. They lived inside their tools, and their tools lived in environments. So that's an amazing edge in its own right, and that's kind of the beginning of art and creation and just being who we are. And speaking of origins, the origin of the word edge comes from Old English. Does anyone here speak Old English? Good, because it just says on the internet, ECG is the word. I imagine that's pronounced ek. And that, in Old English, meant corner, edge, or point, as in sword. So its original use was actually used to describe swords, which gave us one of the most beautiful uses of that in the word ekplega. Say ekplega, please. Ekplega. You just said in Old English, edge play, which was a poetic way for them to describe battle. as edge play, which is a beautiful thing. Not battle, but edge play. But battle does talk about difference of this versus that, etc. But that's a disharmonious edge play. And I think what I want to talk about in this room is a way to create a harmonious edge play. What is harmonious edge play? That's what we're here to figure out. You with me on this?
Yes.
So let's find harmony in edge play. In the mid-14th century, it began to mean the edge of a sea or a lake. And that's how words begin to metaphorize and move. Went from that looks like a sort of edge of a sword, so let's call it edge. And it was originally sword, now it's morphing. And then eventually came to mean margin, or space between a block of text and the edge of a leaf or a sheet. We'll come back to that later. But margins and edges belong together in a beautiful way. Margins and edges, like stream edges that originally were sword edges, and you see in this 19th century Japanese woodblock print, suddenly create this difference, this here and there, this space. A river's edge teaches us something. So let's begin thinking about what edges teach us. What does a river's edge teach? It teaches about natural boundaries, borders, here and there, this and that. And one of the reasons I love this print, other than it shows edges well, is the rain. Isn't that masterful? Rain, 19th century woodblock prints are an amazing place for inspiration, I believe. Don't you agree? Yeah. The rain is nice. The rain creates another edge. It creates another river, really, especially if you live here. This river that populates our days and our world. Endless rain. But inside that rain, we find things to do. And there's a beautiful little poem about rain. Would you like to hear it?
Yes.
By A.R. Amons. It's called Weathering. A day without rain is like a day without sunshine. Snap for poems. Snap for poems. That is nice. And so it creates this kind of margin. There's a couple of margins in here. There's a margin between two bodies of land now by putting a river in between them. And the margin that the rain creates. The word margin by the mid-19th century evolved from just space and edge creates to mean comfort, allowance, cushion. My favorite part of this is provision for enlarged or extended action. That's what edges teach us. For margins. And margin, as I'll say it again. Shall I say it again?
Yes.
I'll say it while walking. Provision for enlarged or extended action. Edges and their margins are important. Just think about those rainy days and the margin those create. That's why we're all so damn smart in this town, is it not? Is it not? Yeah. So, they teach us about margins and extended action. But margins and edges are more important for other reasons, too. Edges create information. One of my favorite, I want to go back over here, it's too far over. One of my favorite anthropologists of all time, Gregory Bateson, famously said that information is the difference that makes a difference. Grok that for a second. And he goes on to say that when you read a page, you're not reading the ink on the page. You're reading the difference between the ink and the paper. Snap for that, just because. And where does that difference exist? It doesn't exist in the ink. It doesn't exist in the paper. It exists in you somewhere. There's this co-authorship, this mutual creation that happens with edges. But edges ultimately give us this information. And that's a beautiful thing, the ink and the page. So when you listen to the edge, you get information. It works so well that you don't even need it to be a real alphabet there. This is graffiti art by an artist named Retina. Are you familiar with his work? Beautiful stuff. And this is called asemic writing. It's writing without actual meaning there, but it still looks like writing. It still reacts to it like writing, because the information is still there. This is an example of information without information. I'm really snapping this one myself. That information comes from the what? Comes from the what? Comes from the edge. Yes. Good man. It comes from the edge. So the inked edge teaches us something. It teaches us about difference and information and our consciousness and art. Say thank you, edge.
Thank you.
There are other edges in the world to discuss. When I first started looking up the edge effect, a lot of stuff comes from biology and ecology, of course. And one of the main places that edge effects are studied are along power line corridors and road corridors. It seems that destructive and abrupt human behavior creates instant edge effects that can be studied by graduate students. But the edge effects in nature aren't as destructive as they may seem to us. They actually just become information in their own right for nature to start making small things and flowers and new growth. So even our sort of abrupt power surge creations create edge effects for new life. So these power lines speak of resilience, recovery, persistence, hope, inevitability, and readiness. We can assert power with the sharp edges we create, our home to new life. There's also entire edge zones, like swamps, which are defined always as this with a that. They're standing trees with water, or standing water with standing trees. It's a combination of things, a swamp. It is, in fact, an edge. It is not this or that, but a transition zone, which is specifically how it's defined. But despite that, they have extremely dense biomes. They have complex food webs. They have high symbiosis. What do swamps speak about? What do they teach us? They teach us about cooperation, variety, vitality, home, harmonious edge play. They're also a place one can dwell, and very low property values. I'm selling some swamp land. You'd like to know. My favorite edge creature, would you ask me what my favorite edge creature is, please?
What's your favorite edge creature?
Well, it's moss. I love moss. Do you not love moss? Moss is amazing. Clap for moss. All the mosses of the world are shrugging towards you in a green, brawny embrace. Moss is a beautiful thing. The mosses live without even soil. They make soil. They live in that scrim of airlessness, of low-moving air where the wind is blowing over a forest floor, but there's a space of dead air in there. That's where the mosses live. They extract their moisture from the air, and they turn things into soil. This dead tree is not a dead tree. That's our linguistic folly. It is a home to moss. It is about to be soil because it is at this edge where moss has met it. This is the alchemy of soil. Edge dweller. Would like to hear a poem about this?
Yes.
Mary Oliver's poem, Moss. Memory of leaping or crawling or shrugging rootlet by rootlet forward across the flatness of everything. To perceive of the earth as round needed something else, standing up, that hadn't happened yet. What a wild family, fox and giraffe and warthog, of course, but these also, bodies like tiny strings, bodies like blades and blossoms, cordgrass, Christmas fern, soldier moss, and here comes grasshopper, all toes and knees and eyes, over the little mountains of dust. When I see the black cricket in the woodpile in autumn, I don't frighten her. And when I see the moss grazing upon the rock, I touch her tenderly. Sweet cousin. There's also the temporal edge, not a place, but a time between the sun being not here and the sun being here. And that arrival, that transition and disappearance creates what I was talking to a ceramicist the other day, and she was talking to me about the fertile void that is inside a vessel. And this is sort of the fertile void of day. This shoulder time has an ecology of all its own. We actually have a room upstairs meant to help you experience twilight and the smells and plant vibes and darkness of this time. We're going to go a little late this time. I'm just having too much fun. There's also a whole slew of creatures. Do the dance, please. Do it. Do it. Oh, it's so good, man. Owl magic. A whole slew of creatures that live at this time. They're called crepuscular creatures. There's more to learn about that upstairs. Isn't that a beautiful word? Say it, please. Crepuscular. Creatures that are crepuscular are bats, and their cousins, the mosquitoes, house cats, straight up, marsupials, owls, the nighthawk, my favorite, the owlet nightjar. There's an entire ecology happening at that time. So twilight teaches us about opportunity and plenitude, about a fertile void. Then, of course, there are cultural edges. The fact that different traditions have different arts and dresses and conceptions of beauty and what is and what should not be. And those cultural differences are another edge, and another beautiful edge, one to be celebrated and identified. Mary Catherine Bateson, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who was just grooving on a minute ago. Would you like to know what she says about edges?
Yeah.
Remember, he gave us the difference that makes a difference. She says, what would it be like to have not only color vision, the ability to see color, but to have culture vision, the ability to see the multiple worlds of others? Cultural edges speak of diversity, celebration, of stitching together, of we and me, then and now, evolving, seeing. There's also edges in our artifacts, those original edges we talked about, where people create shared marginalia. These little fingers, you see the fingers, you know what these are called? You know what these are called?
No.
Manicules, say manicule. They're called manicules, and they're beautiful, and old scholars, every scholar had their own manicule, so that you could tell it was literally a fingerprint. Thank you. Literally a fingerprint, there's literally a fingerprint in the margin. By the way, you can buy me these, my birthday's in April. They're called marginalia paraphernalia. Please. And the talk of presence brings me to the present. One of my favorite edges. It should be the favorite edge of us all. Do you remember the Voyager 1 satellite? Remember? The old days. As it's finished its job photographing the solar system, we, as I was, NASA and I, sent this out of the solar system, which meant it had to sail across what's called the heliosphere, across the heliopause at the edge of the heliosphere, and cross the terminal shock at the edge of the heliopause. And as it did that, the smart NASA folks had to turn around and take one last picture of Earth from its vantage at the edge of the solar system. And it created this amazing picture that Carl Sagan said something beautiful about. May I share that with you? Then I will go. Okay, I promise. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives here. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. This now the poetry of reality. Viewed from the rim of the solar system, we are all in the same place, impossibly small, astonishingly full with possibilities of living together on the edge. Thank you. That was great.